Nicole. Wait,
Okay.
is that Nicole?
Okay. All right.
Nicole.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We did it.
Okay. Let's do the show.
Sorry, Nicole, we ran out of time, so I can't talk to you. Okay, let me try this again. What happened on Friday, Nicole?
Well, as you guys were talking about, it was kind of a formal announcement of friendship and a partnership between the Big Ten and the SEC. You know, they have been growing closer, and the commissioners have been getting along, spending a lot of time together over the last year since Tony Petitti took over the Big Ten. And the ADs in both leagues bounce things off of each other because these are two conferences who face similar challenges, right? Like they're dealing with the same types of budgets. They're dealing with the same types of lawsuits. So they're essentially forming this joint advisory group to look at those issues, the lawsuits that they're facing, employment model, what happens if athletes become employees, and some of those bigger problems that college sports is facing. A lot of people, including Greg Sankey, have lamented the lack of leadership and certainly a lack of leadership from the NCAA. So I think that's what this is really about, is about these two commissioners, these two conferences trying to take the lead and figure out the future of college sports.
Now, there's a line or a paragraph in your column and said there are legal risks that come with too much collaboration now that two conferences represent 34 total schools. So those critical relationships will need to walk a fine line between cooperation and collusion. Explain that.
Right. So that's one of the issues when you are the subject of a lot of lawsuits right now, and there's just a lot of bullseye on your back. And I think, you know, part of the reason that the NCAA has been a target, or individuals have been targeted by different lawsuits, is that they're agreeing to cap compensation, or they're agreeing to have certain rules, and that they are restricting the market, right? So I think, you know, when they say, okay, we're going to make certain rules are going to be up to individual schools like NIL, or conferences could set rules around certain things, it's a small enough group of people and schools that they're hoping to avoid the legal risks involved. So that's part of the concern here. And I think, again, a joint advisory group, it's a governing body that isn't governing anything, right? They're going to work together, but they're not going to have any power. So they're going to lead, they're going to suggest things. But again, I think they're being really strategic here because they're fighting a lot of different lawsuits that are worth a lot of money, but they want to create some sort of solutions that are workable for their schools. And obviously they're dealing with that top 1% of athletes that are making the most money off of NIL, that are going to run into issues with these major lawsuits about back pay, salaries. They've got those football players that are the ones who are stressing the system in terms of money. So they want to be the ones creating solutions instead of Charlie Baker and the NCAA suggesting things that they maybe or maybe don't want to pay for.
But if you look at the blueprint here, and I've been saying all along, it's not a question of if, but when, that we get this model that may be similar to the Premier League or the NFL, that we're going to get maybe 50 of the biggest schools, football schools, and then they just create a model where you have divisions and conferences here. Do you see a time frame where that's where we're headed?
You know, I've felt that way for a while. I think a lot of people do. We're in this gray area as we are going from how it used to be for a really long time to what it will eventually be. It's part of the reason I don't get too worked up about NIL issues, because this is not going to be the business model that we end up with in 5-10 years. We're waiting for that final domino to fall. But I do think that at some point you will have to separate or sort of opt into the highest level of commitment in football, because not everyone's going to be able to afford to fund it. And especially if you have to pay all your athletes, let's say the Johnson case, which is working its way through the court system. If that's the domino, then every athlete is like, okay, we're hourly wage employees. That's every single sport. So who can afford to do that and still invest in football on the highest level? I think there's a lot of different creative ideas that are out there, but I think everyone has kind of come to the terms that it's not going to look like what it is now. You're not going to have 133 FBS programs in the same, quote, highest level of college football. It will be who can pay their players if they're employees, and then still pay their coaches, and then still have the great resources. So there will be a further stratification of what already exists, I think, in college football. I don't know what the timeline is, because we have to let all of these things play out here in terms of what the actual financial and the business model of college sports looks like. But even in the suggestion from new NCAA president Charlie Baker of a new subdivision, it's the same sort of idea. It's like, all right, if you can afford to pay your athletes a minimum of $30,000 each per year for half your athletes, you opt into this level. That would cull the voting rolls, right? That would separate out the people who can't actually afford to do things, but are too afraid to drop down a level right now. So I think you have to let some of that play out before we eventually get to a new world. And, Dan, just to further that point, I would love to see a re-regionalization of all the other sports. I would love to see football pulled out separately and do football schedules, do all of that on its own, but go back to some of those rivalries and the tradition and the reduced travel for all of the other sports.
Thanks for being a good sport, Nicole. Thanks for joining us. We'll do better next time, I promise.
Thanks for having me.
That's Nicole Auerbach, senior writer for The Athletic and College Football Insider, Big Ten Network studio analyst as well.